The church had been standing long after the people were gone. Its bones of stone and wood leaned toward the earth, as if trying to remember what it felt like to rest. The roof was broken open, and through it, the colorless sky poured its pale light, steady, cold, and endless. The bell tower had collapsed first. Its remains lay scattered across the ground, half buried in dry grass and moss. The bell itself had rolled a little way from the wreck. Cracked down one side, the metal dulled and green with weather. No one had touched it in years. The rabbit came from the trees at the edge of the field. He moved quietly, his fur blending into the frost-colored grass. His ears twitched at every sound, though there were few left to hear. The wind had died sometime in the night, leaving the air too still, too clean. He stopped at the base of the fallen tower. The earth there was uneven, littered with small stones and fragments of glass. He sniffed the air, his nose trembling. It smelled of cold metal and dust, of wood that had forgotten warmth. He sat back on his hind legs. His breath came out in small clouds. The silence was complete. He turned his head toward the bell. It sat a few yards away, half hidden by tall grass. The light slid across its surface, catching on the long scar of its crack. The rabbit watched it. The bell didn't move. The air around it seemed thick, as though sound itself had been buried there. Even the insects had left. No hum, no rustle, just stillness. He hopped closer, one slow movement at a time. His paws made no sound against the earth. When he reached the bell, he stopped, nose brushing the metal. It was cold, colder than the ground, colder than the air. He leaned closer, his whiskers trembling. Beneath the scent of rust, there was something else, faint and strange, like rain on stone that had never known water. He pressed his ear against it. Nothing. No echo, no vibration, no memory of sound. He pulled back and looked toward the church. What was left of it leaned against the sky, a wall with half a window, the glass gone but the frame still clinging to its shape. The door had fallen flat, one hinge twisted and broken. Inside was shadow and frost. The pews collapsed in a line of splintered wood. The rabbit moved closer. He passed through the doorway, the boards beneath him creaking faintly, the first sound in hours. It startled him. He froze. Then, the silence swallowed it again, clean and final. Inside, the air was colder. Dust hung in narrow beams of light. The ground was layered with leaves and pieces of plaster that had fallen from the ceiling long ago. At the front of the room, a cross still stood, crooked, one arm broken. Beneath it, the floor had caved in, revealing a hollow space filled with shadows. The rabbit sat down again. His ears twitched, turning toward the opening where the bell tower had been. There was a sound now, soft, low, barely there. A hum. It came not from above, but from the ground, from the hollow beneath the church. He stayed still. The hum grew slow and even, like a breath being taken by something deep below. Then it stopped. The silence returned, heavier now. The rabbit turned his head toward the cracked bell outside. It hadn't moved, but the grass around it seemed to lean slightly toward it, as if pulled by something invisible. He blinked. The light dimmed slightly. The sky turned from pale gray to something closer to silver, colorless and heavy. The rabbit stayed where he was. His reflection appeared faintly in the metal of the bell, tiny and distorted. For a moment, the reflection moved, though he hadn't. He turned his head sharply. Nothing. Only the bell, the grass, and the long shadow of a church that could no longer pray. He lowered himself to the ground, his body pressed against the cold earth, still and small against the ruins. The wind didn't come. The bell didn't ring. The world held its breath, and the rabbit closed his eyes, listening to the quiet where sound used to live. The next morning arrived without color. There was light, yes, a pale, even light that came from nowhere and everywhere. But it carried no warmth, no weight. It just existed, like the memory of a morning that once knew how to rise. The church didn't change. Its broken frame leaned at the same angle, the same cracks splitting the same walls. The air inside was colder, the shadows thicker. but it looked as though time had stopped sometime during the night and decided not to start again. The rabbit was still there. He had moved closer to the fallen bell, his fur damp from the frost. He sat quietly beside it, ears angled slightly toward the hollow beneath the earth. The hum had returned once in the night, faint and slow, almost gentle, and then faded before he could understand it. Now the silence was back, complete and patient. He lifted his head. The fog had settled low over the grass, blurring the outlines of everything. The bell's crack glistened faintly with moisture, a thin film of condensation crawling down its side. He sniffed the air. It smelled the same, of dust, rust, and something faintly sweet, like rain that never reached the ground. He hopped forward and nudged the bell again. The metal didn't move, but the air around it seemed to grow colder, as if the sound of his touch had been swallowed before it was born. He sat back. The frost beneath him melted slightly from the warmth of his body. He looked toward the church again, toward the half-open doorway and the shadow beyond. The hollow under the floor was darker now. The light that came through the broken roof no longer reached that far. He turned his ears toward it. A sound, small, distant. Not the hum. This was sharper, irregular, like stone against stone. He stood, nose twitching, body still. The sound came again. Then another, a few beats later. Each quieter than the last. Then, nothing. The silence deepened. The frost stopped melting. The world seemed to listen to itself, but nothing else came. The rabbit took one step forward. The ground under him made a soft sound, a crunch, so slight it barely existed. He froze. From deep beneath the church came a new noise, a low, dragging vibration, almost like something turning in the dark. It wasn't loud, but it was steady. The earth seemed to breathe with it. He turned back toward the bell. It was shaking, not visibly, but enough that he could feel it through the ground. The vibration came through his paws, faint but real. The metal wasn't ringing, it was remembering. He moved closer, one slow hop at a time, and placed his ear against the bell's surface. There it was, the hum again, but softer now, smoother. A note without a voice. It rose for a few seconds, then vanished. He pulled back. His reflection stared at him from the metal, distorted and uncertain. The crack down the side of the bell seemed wider now. A thin line of moisture ran along it, shining faintly in the dull light. The rabbit looked toward the door of the church. The air inside shimmered faintly, as if the shadows there had begun to move. He didn't go closer. He sat still, eyes fixed on the doorway. The silence stretched, filling every part of the air. Even the fog outside seemed to stop drifting. The bell made one small sound, a faint metallic sigh, barely audible, like breath through a hollow pipe. The rabbit flinched. His ears shot up, his body tense. The sound didn't repeat. The world went still again. He stayed where he was, the frost gathering around his paws, the cold tightening its hold on the ground. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. But beneath the church, somewhere in that hollow space, where the light couldn't reach, something began to whisper again. Not in words, but in rhythm. A slow pulse. A promise that sound, once made, never really dies. The rabbit listened until it faded. Then he turned back to the bell, lowered himself beside it, and pressed his body against the cold metal. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, just before the hum disappeared, the bell beneath him trembled like it remembered its purpose. Then it went still, and the silence returned, thicker than before. By the third day, the air had grown heavy, not with weather, but with waiting. The light that passed through the clouds wasn't light anymore. It was a colorless weight that sat on everything: the grass, the walls, the bell, even the rabbit himself. Nothing shone, nothing faded. The rabbit stirred. His breath came out in a small plume, vanishing almost before it left his mouth. He blinked slowly, his reflection faint in the bell's cold curve. The metal no longer felt solid. It felt hollow, as though the air inside it had learned to hum even when it didn't move. He stood, his paws sinking slightly into the damp earth. The church loomed behind him, its single wall leaning more than before, the roof sagging under the memory of years. Inside, The hollow below the floor had grown darker, the air there thicker, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. He turned toward the sound. It was there again. Faint, deep, the hum returning from below. It came slowly this time, softer than before but closer, pulsing beneath his feet. The bell shivered once. A vibration ran along its cracked edge, not enough to ring, but enough to remind the world what ringing once felt like. The rabbit froze. He listened. The sound grew clearer, a low rhythmic tone, almost like a heart, but slower, more deliberate. He turned toward the doorway of the church. The air there shimmered again, like heat above an old road. Shadows moved, not in form, but in suggestion, as though something within them was shifting from one thought to another. The rabbit hopped forward. Each step made a faint sound, soft but sharp in the quiet. The hum followed him, matching his movement. When he stopped, it stopped. At the threshold, he hesitated. The floor inside was covered in dust and pieces of fallen plaster. The smell of wood, stone, and something old, not decay but time, filled the space. He stepped inside. The light bent differently here, dimmer and colder. The broken windows let in only pale slices of sky. The air didn't move. He looked at the cross still standing at the far end. It leaned to one side, one arm missing, the other shadow stretching across the ground like a broken sundial. The hum came from beneath it. Slow, deep, endless. The rabbit approached. The wooden floor creaked under him, once, then twice. The sound echoed faintly, and for the first time in days, it didn't vanish immediately. It lingered, faint and thin, as if unsure whether to disappear. He stopped at the edge of the hole in the floor. Below, the darkness was not empty. It had depth and shape, and the faint suggestion of movement. The hum came from within it, steady and patient. The rabbit leaned forward, ears angled downward. The air was warm there. He twitched, startled by it. Warmth didn't belong here, not in this cold, unmoving world. He stepped back slightly, nose quivering. The hum rose again, louder now, closer. The bell outside answered. A single low tone, deep, rough, imperfect, rolled through the air. It didn't ring, it groaned, as if the metal itself were remembering the act of sound. The church seemed to breathe. The walls shivered, dust falling in faint lines from the rafters. The sound was soft, but alive, like the last breath of something that had been asleep for centuries. Then, silence. The hum vanished. The warmth disappeared. The rabbit stayed frozen at the edge of the hole, his heart thudding fast against the stillness. His reflection in the cracked bell shimmered faintly from the light outside, distorted by distance. He turned toward it. The bell had stopped moving, but a thin crack of light, faint, almost colorless, had appeared along its edge, seeping through the fracture like water through stone. He watched it until it faded. The field outside had gone completely still again. The fog hung low and heavy, sealing the world back into its quiet. The rabbit stepped away from the hole and sat near the doorway, the cold air brushing against his fur. He stared out toward the bell, the fallen stones, and the place where the road used to be. Nothing moved, nothing changed. But deep beneath the ground, the hum began again. Not a sound now, but a feeling. And this time, it didn't fade. It stayed, quiet, endless, buried within the earth, like something that refused to be forgotten. The fourth day began as the others had ended, gray, unmoving, and without direction. There was no dawn, only a slow change in the shade of the light. The horizon was gone again, erased by the fog. The world was the same color as the stone, as the wood, as the rabbit's fur, an endless palette of forgetting. The rabbit sat where he had always sat, just outside the broken doorway, facing the fallen bell. His body was still, but his ears twitched now and then, searching for a sound that hadn't come yet. The bell had changed. Its crack had widened in the night. The edges were dark, wet, as though something had seeped out from within. The ground beneath it was soft, darker than the rest of the field, a patch of earth that never froze. The rabbit moved closer. He paused every few steps, testing the air. There was a faint vibration beneath him again, weaker, slower, but steady, like the breath of something sleeping below the world. He reached the bell and touched it with his nose. The metal was warm. He drew back instantly, startled. The warmth stayed in the air for a few seconds before vanishing. He circled it once, small paws pressing marks into the damp soil. The hum that used to rise from below was quieter today, deeper. The kind of sound that couldn't be heard, only felt through the ground. He stopped when he reached the cracked side of the bell. The line that had once been a simple fracture now glowed faintly, not with light, but with the suggestion of it, a shimmer too subtle to belong to reflection. He leaned closer. Inside the crack, something darker than shadow shifted. It wasn't movement exactly, but depth, a sense that the hollow within the bell went farther than it should. He stepped back. Behind him, the church gave a long, quiet creak. He turned. The wind had started moving again, only slightly, brushing the edges of the field. The door that lay on the ground twitched once. Dust lifted from the floor inside and drifted through the broken roof, swirling like faint smoke. Then, the sound. It began low from the ground beneath the bell. The hum deepened, spreading outward in a slow wave that rolled through the soil and into the walls of the church. The bell vibrated. Its cracked edge pulsed once, twice, the shimmer brightening and fading like a heartbeat. The rabbit didn't move. He sat beside it, perfectly still, eyes wide, breath shallow. The sound grew stronger. It filled the air, not loud, but vast. A noise that didn't seem made of air at all, something deeper, older. The church trembled. Stones shifted. The fallen cross at the front leaned further, then stopped, holding its tilt like it was listening. The bell gave a single low groan. It wasn't a ring. It was something between sound and memory, the echo of a noise that the air had forgotten how to carry. The rabbit's whiskers trembled. The vibration passed through him, through the ground, through everything. For a heartbeat, he felt the world breathe again. Then, the sound stopped. The silence that followed was thicker than before. The fog pressed in, heavy and slow, curling around the church, the bell, and the rabbit himself. He turned his head toward the doorway. Something had changed there. The hollow beneath the church glowed faintly now, the same color as the shimmer inside the bell. It wasn't bright, just enough to show the outline of the hole, enough to suggest that something deep below had opened its eyes. He watched until it faded. The glow disappeared, and the church sagged again, the sound of its weight settling lost in the fog. The rabbit returned his gaze to the bell. The warmth was gone. The shimmer was gone. Only the crack remained. Wider now, jagged, a scar of silence. He lowered himself to the ground beside it, fur brushing against the cold metal. The air around him carried the faint scent of iron and rain that hadn't fallen. He listened for the hum. It didn't come back. Only the faint echo of it lingered somewhere in the soil. Not sound, not motion, but a promise buried too deep to reach. He closed his eyes. The fog thickened again, swallowing the bell, the church, and the field until only outlines remained, pale shapes in a colorless world. The ground didn't tremble. The air didn't stir. And above it all, where a tower had once risen toward heaven, a single piece of rusted metal clanged once in the wind. Soft, broken, final. The sound lasted only a heartbeat. Then it too was gone, and the bells were silent again.